Hey, good afternoon. My name is George Adam. I'm the president of Valiant Technology, and today we have a really exciting, well, not exciting, but a really informative webinar for you around security best practices for small businesses. Valiant is an IT service provider where our home base is in New York City, and so we have quite a bit of experience over a number of years that we've been working on just IT problems, and security has probably become our largest in the past couple of years. So a little bit about me. I'm the president of the company. I've been doing IT work for about 20 years now. The job's changed quite a bit, but security has become a lot of our focus. And so I'm just going to be walking through everyone this. And let me introduce some people who work with me today. Justin Pincino. Justin
Hello.
is Valiant. Hello, Justin. Justin's Valiant's CIO. He's been working at Valiant since 2010. Super knowledgeable, hands-on, just engineer, and all-around just awesome person to work with. So
Thank
you for
you.
being here, Justin.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Well, and next is Marianne Dobrowski, and
Hi.
Marianne has been working at Valiant for a number of years. Started out working in our account management VCIO role, so really great experience, and then transitioned to developing and managing our training program. We think it's a really critical piece, and thanks for coming here today, Marianne.
Thanks.
So, what are we doing here today? Like, what's the whole purpose of this presentation? We're going through security best practices, and kind of in a nutshell, security best practices are things that you should do in your business to prevent and just protect yourself against some of the dangers that are out there. And there are many. It's super. The time has changed. You know, the days of just putting a firewall up are over and calling it done. We're good. It's a really complex problem. It has a lot more to do with than just IT. It's a business issue. So the next piece that we really want to talk about is kind of going through some of the dangers, breaches, malwares, all these pieces that are out there. It's going up every month, and just as times change, where people work matter, remote work changes the aspect of the footprint and the exposure level. And you know, these numbers are just sobering in many ways. 39 seconds, a hack happens, or attack. You know, you start looking at network logs and what's happening out there. It's really kind of terrifying. So we want to give you some information to be useful, and then some solutions. I'm going to turn it over to Justin, who is going to talk about some of the core fundamental pieces about cybersecurity, so that we're all speaking the same language, and that we can align things. Justin, we'll take it away from us. Give us a little bit of fundamentals.
Sure. Thanks, George. Yeah, one of the core ways of thinking about cybersecurity is called the CIA Triad, and that stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And I'm going to run through each of those real quick so that we know what they all mean. The first is confidentiality. This is making sure that the information or the files or the data that you have is only accessible by the people who are supposed to have access to it. So one example I like is the HR department has access to the HR files, and the design department doesn't because they don't need to work on that. So they can't see that data. They don't have access to it. That's at a base level. Doing permissions like that fulfills confidentiality, but there are some more complex things you can do, like tagging data or categorizing data based on content further than that. But the base idea is making sure that the people who are supposed to see that data are the only ones who see that data. The second one, integrity, that is making sure that the data that's there is accurate. And this can be everything from making sure it hasn't been corrupted, hasn't been removed, hasn't been deleted either on purpose or accidentally. If somebody overwrites a file and changes things, you need to have a way to undo that in order to maintain that integrity. So confidentiality is making sure that the people who need access to that data are the only ones that see it. And integrity is making sure that the data that they see is accurate. The third one is availability. And this is making sure that the data is there when they need it. And this can start with things like making sure your servers are online, but also includes things like making sure that the process for accessing the data, the security protocols, aren't so onerous that you can't get to it. So we have the HR users are the only ones who can open the HR files. When they open the HR files, they know that the data in those files is accurate and is good, and they can get to those files when they need to in order to do their work. One of the things that we find is that this isn't always something that small businesses can do traditionally. That this is an enterprise way of thinking of security, and in an enterprise environment, there are some very complex and in some cases very expensive systems and resources that go into play, and small businesses, small medium businesses typically don't have the resources to do that. So Valiant, we've put together some best practices around tools that are available to small businesses to help meet the same goals as the CIA Triad. And I'd actually like to ask Marianne if you can run us through what some of Valiant's best practices are like.
Yeah, definitely. And like Justin said, we sort of distilled it down to these three concepts: prevent, identify, and respond, to make it a little bit more attainable and a little bit easier to grasp for small to medium businesses. So basically, within our best practices, we start with prevent. Now, prevent is any proactive measure that you take to make sure that breaches don't occur, that spam or phishing doesn't get through. So it's just limiting those points of exposure, which obviously decreases the amount that a breach will happen. Identify is also important because you can't prevent everything. So when things do get through, you want to have logs of that. You want to have automated systems that are detecting and monitoring things so that you can take action in the future. So that's the big thing with identify. Then respond is basically the action that you do take. So you start by creating response procedures so you're not all over the place when something does happen. You know what to do, you know what to lock down. That's something that's really important to us, to make sure that we respond and rectify the situation quickly. And speaking of quickly, we also make sure that security takes priority. So when security events happen, they take priority over other needs. And then the last thing here is that lessons learned is a huge component of this. If something happens, no matter how small, we look at it, we learn a lesson from it, and we bring it back into that prevention leg of the triad. We want to learn and update as much as possible to prevent that stuff from happening again in the future. See what we can do better next time.
That's great, Mary. Exactly right. And really what we find is that it's such an ongoing process in all businesses. And this is obviously, NASA is not a small enterprise by any means, but the numbers are so just staggering and eye-opening that it's worth looking at. So if you look at this here, they had a 366% rise in cybersecurity incidents, mostly around improper usage, which means that either there is a lack of controls, there's a lack of understanding, there's a lack of training. So all these things kind of contribute to it. So when you cut budgets or you cut attention to these things, to this topic, you're gonna get really bad results. And so talking about bad results, Justin, I would love to hear if you want to take us some of the top threats, things that are like that we see in our practice that just are out there and persistent. Hey, Justin.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
There we go. All right. The first kind of threat that I want to talk about is called social engineering. This is not so much a technical threat, more of a new version of a con artist. The idea is that somebody just convinces you to give them access or give them information. This could be, calling up and saying they couldn't log into their computer and they're having a problem. Can you give me my password, or let me use your password? I have to do this right now. And then you give away your credentials. Or it could be something like showing up at your office saying you have an interview in a few minutes and can you please print my resume? It's on this thumb drive, and then you plug in a thumb drive. This is not necessarily a technical attack, but a social type of attack. There is a type of social engineering that uses email, and that's called phishing. Phishing is when somebody specifically uses an email message in order to try and social engineer you. And this is the classic, you get an email that looks like it came from your boss and says, I need you to go buy iTunes gift cards, or you get an email that looks like it came from a company you work with that says, we've changed our wire procedure, send the money here. There's also another type that leads to what's called business email compromise. This is when you get an email that looks like it's crafted in a way to make you have to log in, like your password's been expired, click here to log in, or something like that. And it takes you to a fake site, you give away your credentials, and then now your email account is compromised and can be used for further phishing. The next type of threat that we do see is called malware. This malware really is any type of software that's on your computer or on your phone that isn't doing something useful, that's in the background doing something. Maybe it's mining Bitcoin or sending email or doing stuff. But there's also a relatively new type of malware that gets a lot of attention that's called ransomware. Some of you may have heard of a software called CryptoLocker, was one of the big ones. What this does is encrypts the data on your machine, encrypts the data on your server, and then leaves messages saying, if you want to get your files back, you have to pay a ransom in order to decrypt it. And these have been particularly devastating types because it can wipe out all of your content, everything that's on your system. Another threat that gets less attention but is pretty serious is unpatched systems. When you think about your computer, you know that you get updates for Windows or updates for the Mac OS, or even programs like Office or Adobe products send updates. And what those updates are fixing vulnerabilities that's in that software. Now, not only do you get those updates, but bad actors that are writing malware, they'll get those updates as well. And they can reverse engineer what was in that update to figure out what the vulnerability was. And then they can target their malware towards systems that haven't run that update. So not having a system to update those workstations, those phones, those computers, that software, it can be a really large threat. And the last one is good old-fashioned human error. I mean, humans are humans. We do human things. Sometimes you lose a phone. Sometimes you drop a laptop. Sometimes you forget to follow a process. Sometimes it's Friday at 5:30 and you just want to finish and you cut some corners to get done, and things can happen because of that. It happens. We're humans. So those are all threats that we do see coming up. Those are all threats that we do see coming out that we can look to protect against.
That's great. And it's a lot of information, Justin. That's a ton of stuff. I mean, like almost overwhelming amount of things that are out there. I'm scared. But that being said, so what can you do? How do we approach it? Let's say it's some of Valiant's approach. What do we do?
So building off of what Marianne had said before, the first thing we do is prevent. And there are some things on here that are pretty standard and traditional, like setting up a firewall, having antivirus software, anti-phishing, which is slightly different than anti-spam. It's a newer type of protection that really is looking at phishing trends as opposed to just blocking unwanted advertising emails. But there are also some things that are trickier to implement that are important to put in place. I think the biggest one being a system to keep your computers and software up to date and report on whether or not those systems are up to date, to make sure that you're running those updates and running those patches. Tied into that also is mobile device management. With so much work being done on tablets and phones, it's important to be able to manage those devices and make sure that you have some insight into what those devices are doing as well, not just computers. And the last thing on the list here is identity management. And this is important to keep your accounts secure. So if you don't have any malware on your computer, you don't have any viruses on your machine, but somebody gets access to your password and they log into one of your accounts, that's just as destructive. So we want to have a system in place to make sure we're protecting accounts with multi-factor and make sure we're watching how logins are taking place. The next thing, next step after prevention is identify. And this can get more complicated. What we look to do here is put in place a system called a SIM or a SIEM. There isn't a consensus on which one it is, but the idea is either one is a log aggregation system. So all those tools that are in the prevent area are generating lots and lots of data about what they're doing. And this system collects all those logs and aggregates it into one place and can correlate those events with each other. And complementary to that is what we call eyes on glass. And that is a person, somebody whose job it is to review those logs and watch what's going on so that they can make intelligent decisions about, is this a breach that's happening? Is this just a piece of software that's running? Based on what we look at in those logs and what we see, we move on to respond. And respond gives us, the first thing is we do a quick remediation. We want to find where the breach was, what happened, and patch that, stop that from happening. That could be running an update, that could be restoring from a backup, that could be any number of things. Once that's done, what we want to do is identify what kind of data was involved in that breach, what kind of data was potentially leaked, or do we have evidence that there was actual data leaked? And based on that, figure out who owns that data and who needs to be notified that there was a potential loss of that data. Pulling all of that stuff together and then using that to learn from that experience, we take all of that and bring it right back around to prevent and take it and say, okay, this is what happened, add it into our prevention stack to make sure that this thing doesn't happen again.
That's great, Justin. That's kind of taking that lessons learned from both the technical side and the human side. So these are all great technical controls, but we saw in the earlier slide that 25% of breaches or cybersecurity issues are human. So how do we deal with that human factor? And I think Marianne's going to take us through some of the training and awareness work that she does that really could illustrate what's next. Marianne, please.
Yeah, of course. So training is huge in every aspect of your business, but also especially with security. And the thing is, some people think, I have the best employees, it's fine, but human error happens to everyone. Everyone makes mistakes. This statistic we just threw up is really interesting because it's about half of malicious email attachments are Microsoft Office files. These are things that people work with every day. They're used to, in their workflow, just opening these or downloading these. So they might just do it automatically without thinking. And part of the thing that we want training to do is to get people to think, to get people to, part of their workflow to be to recognize when things are out of place. So if we look at some of the other human error things, that mistakes that are very common for people, these are things like they might receive requests to wire funds or purchase gift cards, which you talked about before. It gets sometimes surprisingly easy to have malicious software downloads, especially if you're just not following best practices. And password and service sharing is a huge one. When we do security training, we have a whole section on password security and best practices, because that's a huge one. Either it's accidental or passwords get hacked maliciously, or sometimes people just think it's the most convenient way. Let me just share my password. It's not that big of a deal. So these all can lead to breaches. They can all be points of vulnerability, and training really helps that. Training in general is something that you should be doing regularly. So it's not as effective if you just do one training, one and done. It's really much more effective if you do repeated training. And this further emphasizes the points that you're sending home. It kind of gets rid of that lazy decline from, people ease off of their vigilance. But also there's always going to be updates. We talked before that malware is ever evolving. There's new threats that come out, but not even just for security training, even if it's training for your workflows, new things arise, new workflows arise. So it's important to repeat trainings and adjust as needed. It's also important that training is universal, that people don't get exceptions. And this goes to the very top, the very busy people, but they should also have training. And even the newbies on your team, they need training as well. They are also a point of entry, even if you don't think the things that they particularly do are sensitive. Again, we talked about your systems are sensitive, and just getting the foot in the door is a huge thing for someone who's trying to act maliciously. And lastly, I think the training needs to be tailored to people. We actually have a lot of training resources online in our knowledge base, thevaliantway.com/KB, but that stuff is all very generic, and I would recommend, if you think there's a need in your office, that you get a tailored training. You look at your needs, you look at the size of your business, you look at the vertical you're in, and talk to your professionals, your IT staff, about what exactly you think the pain points are for your specific company. So that's a couple things that you would need for training in general. But if we're talking security training, this is huge. You really want it to be focused on how to identify and avoid threats. So that's really specifically what you want to do, is have people know what they're looking out for and show them what to do if they see it or if they need to avoid it. One way that's really good to determine sort of the level is to do simulated attacks. So this might be fake phishing emails. You can see who clicked, and you can pinpoint like where the most vulnerabilities are, what people tend to be falling for, and you can really know where to focus your training. And then lastly, just keep in mind that training is going to help just get people on the same level. At the very basics, they're all going to be using the same words now, they're going to be doing the same identification, and it's going to be a lot easier for people to communicate and people to share their knowledge regarding whatever your training is on, especially with security.
That's really true, Marianne. Part of the issue is always we see this is split between the IT department and the general business units, and even in a larger enterprise, the security teams. And really, in a small business, we want to kind of short circuit that sense of bifurcation by establishing a strong IT governance function or IT governance process. Really, we want to control the IT assets and data, all the different pieces of it, not because it's like the evil IT guy who wants to be in control. It's more that if we don't know what's out there, how can we measure it and manage it and protect ourselves from it? It is really beyond even the scope of any IT person for this singularly to control the IT. It has to be a management functionality and management buy-in and management control, management participation. Very much a shared participation. Directions are an alignment of where the business is going, what the firm has to get done, and then the IT and the subset of security has to follow it. It's such a critical piece of it that I think falls by the wayside for many businesses. And one of the things is people look at security as just technical controls, as just maybe, hey, I check my box when I'm once a year training. But reality is it starts at the management level and leadership level, saying security is important to our business. And there's a lot of reasons why it's important. Because when you look at the numbers, there's one single one that really struck me that was staggering. It was sobering, is actually a really great way of more sobering. I mean, I don't know if I can use the right descriptive adjectives or adverbs here, but gerunds, I'm not sure. But the point is, it's 60% of small businesses cease operation in 6 months. So what does that mean for a small business? I mean, think about this for a second. What would happen in your business if you wired $100,000 by accident to a vendor? Or if someone compromised your email and one of your clients wired whatever amount of money to one of your vendors? I've heard of that happen time and again, where someone compromised an email of an executive. Next thing you know, money is transferred, and now the company's on the hook to pay it back. Would you be able to survive that? What about your reputation? Are you trustworthy? Are you taking due care with and due diligence with the data you're entrusted with? And that could be anything from your client's data to your employees' data. There's a lot of information that every business has internally that should be identified and protected at all times, and it's a management responsibility to do so. And so we really want to get people kind of thinking about it and thoughtfulness. And if you ignore this will do a bad thing. Bad things will happen. You will. There's a liability in the New York State here, the New York Shield Act, where there's a lot of potential for litigation and fines. But the good part now that we got the fear in, it really is a good place to take the opportunity to step back and see where can we improve these processes? Where am I missing in the IT work that is not aligning to my business goals? And you can work with your either IT provider, internal team, outside consulting, all could help you kind of put together a full solution that is end to end in the business, so that that you are doing the best you can, and it's always continually improving. I think that's one of the pieces that I took away from this here, from lessons learned. Lessons learned is continuous improvement. It's always what happened, how we make it better, what happened, and how we make it better. So just to kind of wrap it up and put a pin in it, I think that we want to conclude it. We really want to say, SMBs are constantly under attack. We are as big a target as enterprise, maybe not as visible, but the target of opportunities there and the potential for loss is much higher. Many small businesses couldn't afford to take that kind of damage financially, reputation-wise, or even just the loss of productivity. I mean, think about if your business was crypto locked tomorrow, all your data wasn't even available for a week. What would happen then? That sort of thing. So I think following some best practices is a great starting point. It puts in place guidance and guidelines. And I think really by combining good sound technical solutions that are appropriate to the business, training, which is the human aspect of informing people and having a security mindset throughout the entire company and enterprise. And finally, having a management component of understanding how important is data security and IT as a whole is for your business can really change the entire your entire footprint and your exposure and what we like to call your attack surface, which is a kind of a fancy word for all the stuff you got. So with that, I think that our next, we have some really great stuff that we put together as part of a resource guide that has some information about things that we put together, some things around from NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology that run by U.S. government. That has some really great information, checklists and processes that we try to follow as a best practice internally and with our clients. And just some downloads. I mean, check out our Shadow IT guide. That's a great place to understand where your exposure is and all these different pieces of it. And with that, I want to say thank you for attending. I hope you got some information out of it that's useful. I want to say thank you, Marianne. It's just always informative and just enlightening. Justin,
thank you.
as always,
thank you.
I love listening to talk about this stuff. It gets me excited. And keeps me going. And so if you like, we have a download this presentation. We have, and if you ever have any questions for us or our team, please submit it at that link there. We do a weekly shorter version of a Q&A session. And our next larger webinar that has more developed content is on the modern workplace, which we're seeing as just a change that's happening in all businesses, small and large, as we have more remote work, we have more ability to just do better with what we got and just exploring the tools and processes. All right. Well, with that, I want to say thank you. Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Marianne. And have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.